11 to 16. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. Okay. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. For anyone who breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. Amen.
Thank you for inviting me once again to be part of your church fellowship this morning, and really enjoyed the worship so far. I just want to point out a misprint on your service sheet which says a saint from St. Mary's. I'm not sure what word they were trying to put in there, but it's certainly not a correct description of the person who's before you. There's some other words which my children would maybe have put in there, but certainly not a saint. But Tony asked me to look at, or to follow on from what you were looking at, which was the passages, chapters in 1 Corinthians. And I felt, just the more I looked at what you were covering, that this idea of changing it or taking you to part of the Sermon on the Mount was maybe something that would speak to your hearts this morning. So I have changed what you would normally be hearing this morning to fit with this message, which I believe might be for your fellowship here today. And it's this passage from Matthew chapter 5. We read 11 to 20. Thank you to Dylan, my new son-in-law, of about 1 week. 2 weeks, is it? 2 weeks. Yeah, Dylan and Katie were married a couple of weeks ago. But then I want you, when you get some chance to take some time to yourself at home, to read right through from Matthew chapter 5, 6 and 7, and actually get a whole flavour for the Sermon on the Mount, because this is a snapshot of it, which I think will help you get into it, but there's so much more to feast on there, and so I invite you to do that. But the thing that I was getting from this, and I often, when I'm asked to speak, and I look for a passage, I'm looking for a surprise from the passage. I'm looking for something, particularly in a well-known passage, because our scriptures are the living word. I'm looking for something which is jumping out at me and thinking, oh, I didn't see that before. And that's why what we read is the living word. And there is something very much in this passage, Matthew chapter 5, 11 to 20, where I just thought, oh, I never saw that before. And I must have read this over hundreds of times. And it's this simple fact of how Christianity, the Christian way, is so different to the religious way. And the Sermon on the Mount, it seems to me that Jesus is setting up the two ways for us to get a hold of this picture of twos and talks in pairs. And you may think, when he's setting up those pairs, as I know what's coming here, he's going to talk about believers and unbelievers. He's talking about the good and the bad, or the light and the darkness. But that's not what he's doing. It seems to me, the more I read it, that he's setting up the two ways of the Christian way. Of course, it wasn't called Christian then. They were just known as the way in the early church. But the Christian way and the religious way. You see, you never saw Jesus talking about the dirty, stinking sinners. You know, when he spoke about sinners and tax collectors and those types, if you like, he was good with them. He dined with them. He was merciful. He was gentle with them. But you did hear him talking about the dirty, stinking Pharisees and the religious type. You know, he even said, you're clean on the outside, but you're filthy on the inside. And so Jesus was lambasting the religious people. And also, they, of course, turned on him, and that ended up on the cross, as we know. But that's the surprise for me in this Sermon on the Mount, is that when he goes on throughout the next chapters 5, 6, 7, you'll see he talks about two gates. He talks about two paths. He talks about two houses. The wise men built the house upon the rock. He talks about two houses. He talks about two trees. One was poison and one was good fruit. He talks about two ways. One that leads to destruction and one is the true way. And here's the surprise. The two ways are not good against bad. The two ways are in the contrast of the Christian way, the way that he was leading us into, and the religious life. Both look very similar. That's why he was talking in pairs. Both were law-keeping. Both were trying to keep the Ten Commandments. Both were praying. He goes on to talk about when you pray, don't do it like this, but do it like this. Both were giving to the poor. He goes on to say, when you give, don't give like this, but give like this. He's saying both were going to the church or the synagogue in those days, but one was described as destruction and the other was described as the way, the truth. And Jesus was saying, I believe that Christianity is very different to the religious way. And I'm just going to pull out three things, and hopefully we'll make it in time for communion later. But I'm going to pull out three things that from the passage that we had, which I would say emphasizes this difference. One, that the Christian way is attractive, and I'll explain that. Two is it's adoptive, or we are adopted. And three is it is accomplished. And I'll unpack that a little bit. Now, the first is that it's attractive. Now, you may look in the mirror and think, well, I'm not too bad, but, I'm not really that attractive. But in the Sermon on the Mount, both the religious and the Christian way are described as light. That was the start of that. They're described as light, but one was put on a stand and the other was put under a bowl. The surprise, again, is that Jesus isn't comparing light and darkness, which is perhaps what we would expect, but light that shines in a room and one that is put under a cover. One of my favorite commentators at the minute, a guy called Timothy Keller, talks about one shining in a way that is both attractive to the world and attracted to the world. So attractive and attracted to the world. And I'll explain that. People who don't agree with the Christian way, they somehow are still drawn to us in a way of, they see what we do. I was talking to a man called, trying to make sure I change his name, a man called Kevin in our wards just this Thursday. And he says to me, I always see Christians doing good things. And I wish I could be like that, but I just can't believe. And this guy said to me, I wish I could believe because I see what they're doing. And that's what I mean by attractive. What we are and what we do is attractive to people like him. He is attracted to the way that we are, but also we in turn then are attracted to his needs. We're attracted to the needs we see around us. And we've talked a little about the festival. And of course, that is a real situation where you can be attractive and attracted to the situations that you see just from the festival as it falls out onto our streets here. And it might be through something else that goes on, like the food bank and the way that you minister through that. We're attractive, but also attracted to the needs around us. It might be in a hospital ward. It might be just through something like Messy Church. I spoke to Annie this week, I think it was Wednesday, and Annie says to me, do you know, I know all the churches in Newport because I go around there looking, attending their Messy Churches. Because, I said, well, why don't you go to your own church? I know what church she goes to. I said, well, they don't do Messy Church. She goes, because she's got young kids, to all the different churches, whether it's at a Saturday at one place and a midweek somewhere else. And she hops around the churches because it's attractive to her. And she wants her kids to be drawn to the message that we put out. So, and her own church, which is maybe steeped in religion, and I'm not going to say which church it is, but maybe she is attending a church that is portraying a religious way rather than the Christian way. So Annie is drawn to us. She's attracted to us. And we are attracted, therefore, because of her situation, because of her coming through our doors, we're attracted to her needs. Now, I'm not saying that everyone who comes through our doors are going to agree with everything you say. As soon as you open your mouth and explain what the gospel is and who Jesus is and that he is risen and the whole thing about the resurrection, people are not going to go along with it. They may downright disagree with you and say it's absolute load of rubbish, but still you find that we are attractive because of who we are and because of what we do. And it's a good question to ask yourself. How do you react to the situations you see in your neighborhood or even in Newport as a whole? Are you attracted to those situations, or do you think, oh, it's full of these problems, and you can list them, you can see all the issues, but no thanks? Then perhaps that's more inclined for you to be of a religious nature, because religious people are not attracted to the needs of the areas around them. They want to hide their light under a bush, as it were, or they may think they be a little bit contaminated. They see specks all over the people that come in. You know, they're totally covered in dirty specks, maybe, but of course, they've got planks in their own eyes, according to Jesus' teaching, but they don't see that. They just see that they're going to be contaminated by the needs around them. And religious people are not attracted to those needs, and neither are they attractive to those needs. Why? Because they make them feel condemned. We maybe don't keep the rules. You know, the Pharisees kept, I've written it down somewhere, but I can't find it now. I think it was... 635 different rules they kept as part of their ritual of who they were as clean, pure people. So they didn't want to be contaminated by the dirt and the specks around them. They wanted to be pure, and 635, all rules of them, they were not drawn to the needs of the areas around them. And so if you look at the neighborhood and think, well, I'm not drawn to that because that is a bad issue and I don't want my family or my situation corrupted by that, maybe you're more of a, dare I say it, a religious plank than you are following Jesus' way. So if you can take that from me, maybe just dwell on it. If you're a Christian, you are attracted to the needs, and that we're also attractive and attracted. So that was the first thing. The second thing is that it is adoptive, and I'm just trying to make it fit with attractive and adoptive, but I actually mean adopted, okay? But it's this verse 16 which I got hold of. It says, let your light shine before others that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. The Christian way in serving others is because we are his family. He is our Father. Look at how many times, as you read the Sermon on the Mount, how many times it talks about Father. And the Lord's Prayer, of course, is in there as well. But see how many times it uses the word family. Father, we are meant to think in terms of family. We are adopted. We are His. The surprise in the Sermon on the Mount is how much it doesn't talk about the Almighty. It talks about Father. It's tender. It's close. It wants us to get that message. You see, if you're an employee and you do well, your boss is happy. If you're an employee and you mess up or don't do well, you get a bit of a warning. And if you keep doing it, you might get a second warning and then you're fired. Now, I have to be careful here because I've got two of my daughters in front of me. But I have three daughters, and I can honestly say with all my heart that all three of them have been the most perfect examples of children at some point in their lives. But likewise, all three of them have been an absolute pain in the bum from times of their lives. But they are still mine. They are still my children and will always be. Still accepted, still loved. Our Lord will never leave us or forsake us. We are His. We are His own. We are adopted, and that means we are joint heirs with Jesus. What a message that is. We are joint heirs with Jesus, accepted and loved. The Sermon on the Mount teaches that the Christian lives the Christian way because God is your Father. The Christian lives the Christian way, not because you're trying to win brownie points and that hopefully one day He will accept you in His club. No, that's not the Christian way. The Christian way is that you live the way, the attractive way, because you are His, because He is your Father. And likewise, when he says in the Sermon on the Mount, verse 26, which is a bit later than when we read, he says, don't worry. Now, he goes on to say, why don't we worry? Now, of course, as soon as he says, don't worry, we all worry. Am I worrying about worrying now? But he goes on to say, don't worry, because He loves you so much more than the birds of the air. He loves you so much more than the flowers of the fields. It also talks about salt and light, and we get used of that metaphor as well. Why is your light shining? It's because God is your Father, because you are in His family and the light of Christ and the love of Christ shines through you. I often say that to our chaplaincy team whenever we're on reflective days and things like that, that allow the love of Christ, the light of Christ shine from us. Maybe not through words, but just through who we are as people in the hospital. So His light is shining from you. Why are we salt? Well, salt in those days was rubbed into meat to preserve it from going off, or and also to make it tasty. So when you do things in your community, or when you see needs in the community, the Christians get in there. They think, well, I can roll my sleeves up here and I can do it. That is salty business. That's what is making you who you are. You're stopping things from going wrong like the meat, or bad like the meat, because you're rubbing your salt into the situation. And this community is getting involved, and the community, you as the community, are salty. If it's in the festival, it's in the festival. You are salt and light in that situation. You never, I mean, the last few times I've been out for a meal, for some reason I have pushed the boat out and had steak. But you never hear me putting my knife and fork down and think, boy, that was great salt. You know, I'm putting my knife and fork down and say, that was a great steak. So we're not drawing attention to the fact that we are salty or anything great to look at. It is to glorify the Father. You never go to a Bible study with Tony and Sally and go home thinking, do you know, that was great. Tony and Sally, they were great. They made me feel like nothing. They knew so much and I knew nothing. No, you go home thinking that was a great study, because the salt was in the whole, was throughout the whole group. So when religious people do stuff, it may look the same. They may pray, as it said. They may read scriptures even. They may do good works, it says. But it is not out of a living relationship with the Father. It's not because they're adopted. It is because of duty often. It's because of fear of being struck down by God. It could be out of pride. Won't people think I look great doing this? That Jesus often pointed out the hypocrisy of the religious people. But it's not out of a living relationship with the Father. When Christians do stuff, it may look the same. Read the Bible, it might be praying, it might be out in the community, it might be giving of money, but it is because you are adopted, because you are one of God's family and that you know it. And thirdly, it is because the difference between Christian way and the religious way is because of this phrase Jesus said, I have fulfilled it. It is because he said from the cross, it is accomplished. And that to me was another surprise from this Sermon on the Mount as I read it. He said, verse 17, Matthew chapter 5, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. That's a strange thing, just to tuck away in the middle of all salt and light and things. But he tucks this in and says, I have not come to abolish it, but to fulfill it. Jesus fulfilled the law, and through his pure life, we have purity. When he cried from the cross, it is finished, he wasn't saying, I'm finished. He wasn't saying, this is my last breath, I'm done for. He was saying, it is finished. I have accomplished what I came to do. I have fulfilled all that the law and the prophets require of me. And as he gave up with those last words, in his dying words, he said, it is accomplished, fulfilled. And as I said earlier, the Pharisees, I found my number now, it is 635 different laws that they could tick off those boxes and be righteous. So how could Jesus, or how could even we be more righteous than the Pharisee? I don't have 635 things to tick off. Honestly, I may look like I'm that good, but but then Jesus takes us into the Old Testament, into the Ten Commandments. I've got this at the ready just so that I could have it. So he goes into this discourse, and if you're taking notes or want to think about it again, in verse 21, in verse 27, in verse 31, in verse 33, in verse 43, he goes into the Ten Commandments and says things like, you have heard it said of old that you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother or sister will be liable to judgment. He then goes into another one. What did I say? 27. You have heard it said that you should not commit adultery. But I say to you, Jesus speaking, everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery. Whoa. And then he says in verse 31, it is also said that whoever divorces his wife then can let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you. So Jesus is answering back to the laws that they had ticked the boxes off. And what is he saying? He is saying religion may have all the external trappings and display of being good and righteous, but we can still be have ill thoughts or bad thoughts about people, and he calls that murderous thinking. We can still have lustful thoughts, and he calls that adulterous thinking. And he goes through the commandments and touches on those things. And what's happening here? I mean, if you don't read that and think, I have absolutely no chance of being a Christian, then I haven't done very much good at preaching here this morning. If you don't read that and feel, whoa, I have absolutely no chance in climbing that or clearing that bar. Jesus sets the bar so high that none of us can get over it unless we have a leg up from somebody who has already accomplished it all for us. And of course, that is our Savior. When Jesus says, you have read that, but I say, he is saying, I am going to accomplish it. When he said this, he was still alive. He was going to accomplish all that the law and the prophets. So what does it mean? If you look at the Sermon on the Mount, as an example, you read it and you think the character, even if the Beatitudes, which are just before what we read, from 1 to 11, I think, if you read the Beatitudes, you think the character of that person who's so blessed, is just what I would love to be, but just what I can't be, I'm afraid. But if you look at those, the Sermon on the Mount, he is the one who lived it all perfectly. He fulfilled the Beatitudes. If you go through them again, blessed are the merciful. Well, he was so merciful so that we could receive his mercy. But he received no mercy on the cross so that we could receive that mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, they will see God. He was so pure in heart, as we know, faultless. He knew no sin. But the Father turned away from him. So at the time when he became sin for us, he did not see God, and God would not look at him on the cross. He became sin for us. Why? So that we could see God. So that we could have access to his presence. Blessed are the meek. They will inherit the earth. He accomplished that too. He was so meek, he gave up everything for us. If you read the Philippians passage, you'll see exactly what I mean by that. He gave up everything for us so that we could inherit everything he had. And so when he cried, it is finished, as I said before, he wasn't saying he was finished. He was saying he accomplished it. He had fulfilled the law. Perfectly pure so that we could be pure. Perfectly meek so that we could inherit all that he had. Perfectly merciful so that you could receive his mercy. So if you think that bar is too high, just hear those words again. That because of him, we are pure. Because of him, we have mercy. Because of him, we have inherited everything that he gave up for us. So it's not a bar that is so high that we can't hurdle it. The bar is in fact vertical. The bar is like that lovely picture in the Sistine Chapel, which I'm sure you know as soon as I say it, that finger of God reaching. It's like a hand reaching to you from the Lord to us, saying the bar is not vertical. You don't have to jump it. It's saying it's a hand reaching out to you that you can take the hand and you can get your leg up over the bar because he has made you perfectly pure. As soon as you ask for forgiveness, that's what you are. And you can be perfectly free because as soon as you turn to him and receive his freedom, then that's what you have, his freedom. He says he gives us his peace, the peace that passes understanding. As soon as you turn to him, you can, whatever your turmoil. I mean, he spoke to the waves obeyed him. So the storms and the turmoil within you, he can speak to that situation as soon as you turn to him and receive his peace. So the Sermon on the Mount is not a horizontal bar of things that we just can't possibly clear. It is about the horizontal bar of the Lord reaching to us and saying, take my hand. It's the contrast of Christianity and religion is a contrast of, Bill Hybels said this, of do against done. It's what you think you need to do to be religious against what he has done for you. So if you ever think, I must do better, and you must, then hear that little phrase. This is do against done. Okay, as soon as you're saying I must do that, then hear the other word. It is what he has done for you that it matters. So it's not about duty, which is the way a religious person would see how they respond to their faith. It is about what he has done for us. And so we know that we can have his peace, his freedom, and his forgiveness. So practically, what can we learn from the Sermon on the Mount? Well, first, what matters is who I am from the inside out. It is that I'm an adopted child of a heavenly Father. I'm a joint heir with Jesus. That blows my mind away. I don't actually know what it means, except it says it. And he has fulfilled every part of the law so that I can be a part of him, and I can clear any bar that people tell me that I need to hurdle. I can be pure, I can be free, I can be at peace, only because he has done it all for me before. And that makes me want to behave in a way that makes me attractive. It makes me attracted to the needs and the situations around me. And if that's left you concerned about, well, am I on the wrong track? Am I doing stuff because I just want to please God? I want to earn brownie points? Well, the lovely part of our message is that we do tend to veer between one and the other. If you do think, well, I need to please God here, that's part of our nature, is to try and fall into the world's ways. But there's a short path back, just to say to God, God, I'm sorry. I messed up there. I got back onto the religious mode. Sorry, Lord. Receive me. Let me receive your forgiveness. So the message isn't one that condemns somebody who thinks, well, I spent my life trying to please God. The message is that the Lord wants you to return to him and receive all that he has done for you. That's the good news. It's that he who was perfectly merciful for you, so that you could receive his mercy in abundance. And all we need to do is sorry and get our way back to him. Thank you for bearing with me. And I want to receive communion here with you today. So I hope we'll be all right for time. Okay.